Good evening and welcome to Domination Submission Radio, my friends. My name is Mike Mackay, and I am your host with the most BDSM, DS, kink, and fetish talk on Blog Talk Radio. And tonight, our topic is going to be the joy of rope. And so I think you can find this very, very interesting. But let's go over how you can be a part of this show first. It is a call-in show, so if you'd like to call in and share your thoughts or ask a question, the number is 347-857-1862. Let me give that to you one more time. 347-857-1862. Make sure you write that down. You know you're going to call me one of these days, so you might as well have it handy. You can also check us out on our website. Our website address is domination-submission.com, and there, if you just click on the DS Radio link, you'll get a page that has links to all of our shows, including all of the past podcasts that we've done that you can listen to anytime you like. You can even download them into your portable devices and listen to us while you're out jogging or walking the dog or whatever. So while you're there, please follow us on Twitter and Facebook as well. We love having followers. Stalk us all you like. That lets us know you're out there, and it gives us a better handle on what you'd like to hear for future shows. So do that if you would. Oh, one other thing that I forgot to mention is that we do have our chat room open. If you're listening to us live on Blog Talk Radio at the Blog Talk Radio site, just scroll down to the bottom of the page and you'll see our little chat room open and ready for your grand entrance. You can also ask your questions there. I do check it fairly regularly during the show, and so if you have a question, go ahead and type it there if you're a little bit shy about calling in, and I'll try to answer your question on the air. All right, let's talk about rope bondage, BDSM rope play. There's a lot of different ways of referring to it. For the most part, bondage is a much larger umbrella term that covers pretty much anything that immobilizes a person. And rope play is a subcategory of that. And believe it or not, there's a lot that goes into rope play as well. You might have heard the term shibari. Shibari is a Japanese term which actually means intricate rope work or intricate rope knot tying. It doesn't necessarily refer to the rope play that is specifically used in BDSM for sexual purposes. When you start getting into the sexy rope play, then you're talking about kinbaku. Kinbaku is another Japanese term, which means sexy, intricate rope play. So shibari is the generic term that we use for intricate rope work. Kinbaku is the term that we use for sexually oriented rope work. And so that's a great little piece of trivia for you to tuck away and pull out when it's least expected. Believe it or not, there's an awful lot of people in the BDSM lifestyle who really don't know kinbaku as the term for what it is. Most people simply assume that shibari applies to all of it. In an umbrella sense, it really does. So let's dig a little deeper into shibari and kinbaku. Why do people enjoy doing this? Well, that's a really, really tough question to answer. And I'm asked it all the time, particularly from people in the vanilla lifestyle, if you want to call it a lifestyle. But vanilla folks are always asking me, what is it you like about bondage? What do you find attractive about it? And I have to admit, I'm pretty stumped by this question most of the time. I usually end up answering the question with another question, which is, well, what is it you like about chocolate? It's a tough question to answer. And even so, there are some very specific reasons why people like rope bondage. Those reasons usually fall into three general categories: sexual, aesthetic, and psychological. If we're talking about the sexual reasons for liking rope bondage, well, there's a lot of subcategories there as well. You can generally chalk it up to the temporary surrender of your power to somebody else when you're tied up. You're immobilized. You're helpless. It's not a feeling that we generally experience in our day-to-day lives. And when we do, if we do in our day-to-day lives, it's a very scary thing. I can only think of a few times in my entire life, maybe count them on one hand, where I felt helpless, and it was not a good feeling. For example, I can remember standing at the site of a car accident and feeling helpless about being able to do anything to help the people involved. It's a very, very bad feeling for most people. And so it's not something that we generally seek out in our day-to-day lives. In fact, we generally do our very damnedest to avoid it. And so to be able to dip our toe into it and experience it in a safe and exciting way without actually having to experience the bad side of feeling helpless is a very big deal for some people. It's a very strong sexual turn-on for some people. And so that ability to just temporarily let go and feel helpless and immobile and totally at the mercy of somebody else, hopefully someone that you trust, is a very, very strong motivation for people to try rope bondage and to experiment with it. On the flip side, there's also a sexual thrill in bondage for the person doing the tying as well, because that is a way to emphasize that total power exchange. Now, we were talking about some of the sexual reasons that people try out bondage or are attracted to bondage. There's also aesthetic reasons, and by that I mean that there are a lot of people out there who see bondage as an art form. And to be honest, if you look at some of the photography that's out there that highlights shibari and kinbaku, it is absolutely gorgeous. If you think the human body is beautiful on its own, sometimes it can be even more incredibly stunning when it is wrapped up in that gift wrap, is the way I like to think of it, of rope bondage. And there's some really, really nice photography out there. Just go to Google Images and search on the term kinbaku or shibari, and you'll see some really gorgeous stuff out there. So the aesthetics of rope bondage are motivation enough for a lot of people. In fact, there are a lot of people who are attracted to this for purely aesthetic reasons. It's not a sexual thing in any sense for them. Sex is probably the last thing on their minds as they're going through the process of either tying someone up or being tied up themselves. And to be perfectly honest with you, I sometimes am personally conflicted because on one hand, I am very attracted to bondage personally in a sexual way because of that total power exchange, and it accentuates the power transfer between two individuals. But I'm also attracted to it very much for aesthetic reasons. I think it's absolutely gorgeous what can be done with the right skills and with the right model and the right circumstances. So I perfectly understand both the sexual and aesthetic motivations for enjoying rope bondage. The third reason why people are attracted to this is psychological. There are a lot of people who just feel fulfillment and get just a great amount of joy from being tied up or tying someone up. And there are infinite number of reasons why this might be so, and they may also go back to the sexual reasons and other things like that. But sometimes some things are just what they are. There are some people who like enclosed spaces, and there are people who like wide open spaces. There are some people who like small cars, and some people who like big cars. Well, when it comes to bondage, there's some people who just like to be immobilized, and there's some people who like their freedom. So I'm not a psychologist. I didn't stay at a Holiday Inn last night, so I can't even pretend to be, but I will tell you that there's an infinite number of reasons why people are attracted to this for sexual, aesthetic, and psychological reasons. So rather than try to second-guess why people do this, if you're interested in bondage, particularly rope bondage, we have a lot of great information for you this evening. And don't be afraid to experiment with it.
When people are starting to learn bondage, one of the things that really hangs them up is what's the right way to do bondage. People are afraid to pick up a piece of rope because they're like, oh, well, I can't do it like the masters. You're psyching yourself out. There is no right or wrong way to do bondage. Bondage, in a way, is almost like erotic macrame. I'm dead serious. I will do a chest tie, and you know what? My chest tie is never the same way. I could tie the same person up in a chest tie twice in a row, same body, same day, 5 minutes difference, and there's going to be some variation. And when you get yourself hung up on like, oh, well, it doesn't look flawless, or it isn't like that person's chest tie, everyone has a different style. When you start really looking at rigors, you start being able to identify someone's style to the point that now I can look at a bondage picture and usually know the person who did the tie without there being any identification because their style is so distinctive. So what I found when people first start out, they second-guess themselves. They know how to do the tie, but they let their head get in the way of their fingers. It's muscle memory. You guys can all tie your shoelaces, right? When you were 5 years old, tying your shoelaces was you were so proud of yourself. You had the little board and you practiced on it, and I got my lace, and now you don't even think about it. Bondage is like that. Once you get that tie down, I've actually started doing blindfolded ties. And I've found that I tie better, quicker, tighter, and more efficiently blindfolded because my eyes get in the way. It's muscle memory. When I first started doing bondage, I would sit there and I would watch TV. And I would just do a tie over and over again until I could do a tie without my eyes even looking down.
And that was a clip from somebody, not a bondage educator, who teaches people how to do this and how to experiment with this and how not to be afraid of trying out your bondage skills. The other thing that you might want to do is not be afraid of doing what they call little bondage switching, and not necessarily switching in your relationship roles or switching when it comes to any really big, important scenes that you're doing, anything like that, but do a little experimenting and learn what it's like to be on both ends of the rope, so to speak. And to talk a little bit about that, I'm going to play a clip from Midori, who's also a bondage educator, who talks about why you might want to do a little rope switching.
Why am I recommending that somebody who usually gets tied up should do a little bit of tying? Why? Well, you might like it, okay. Understand what you're getting into. You understand the top's language. So if something goes wrong, you can communicate to the top in a way that they understand. Like you can, if you have the experience of it, you can say, oh, there's a little twist there. And if you adjust that, I'll be fine. It also allows you to appreciate all the hard work that we do for you. But really, it'll allow you to be able to communicate any issues or anything you want changed in a way that the top can understand. Okay? Now, for those of you who usually do the tying, why am I recommending that you get tied? For those who are usually doing the tying, why am I suggesting you get tied in a laboratory experiment? It's good to know what it feels like when it goes well, when it goes wrong. It's good to know what it's like when somebody's working slowly on you or quickly on you. So you can better understand the effect of the tool upon the flesh. So in a laboratory experience, I fully encourage people to try both. How you delegate your labor and love at home, that's up to you.
I also recommend that you learn to tie and be tied. If for no other reason, it encourages you to be a little empathetic to the other person on the other end of the rope. If you've never been tied up, it's pretty hard to understand how something is going to feel to the person who is being tied up. If you've never tied someone up, it's kind of hard to understand how difficult it might be or how intricate the work is sometimes or how long it can take. And so I believe that it's important to have a little empathy and learn both sides. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that you are giving up your relationship role as a submissive or a dominant, but you can be temporarily a top or a bottom for something like this. Now, there are a lot of different kinds of scenes that you can do when it comes to rope bondage, and again, you do the scenes because of your motivation for liking it in the first place. You either have a sexual, aesthetic, or psychological motivation for doing this, and so the scenes generally reflect that to a certain degree. For example, you might have a rape fantasy that appeals to you, and so that bondage scene works into that fantasy of yours. It helps highlight and make those fantasies more real to you and more pleasurable to you. You might have an abduction fantasy. Maybe you have always dreamt or fantasized about being abducted and tied up and forced to do all sorts of kinky things. And so, again, whatever scenes you're doing may play into those fantasies or those idealized scenarios. There might be a whole lot of very complex predicaments that are in your fantasy, and so your scenes could reflect those as well. A lot of people have torture fantasies. Obviously, most people don't stand there and take torture without wanting to avoid it somehow, run away, and so being tied up makes that kind of difficult. The tying, the rope bondage itself may not necessarily be torture in itself, but it might immobilize you so that you can be tortured. There's a certain amount of humiliation in these kinds of scenes and in this kind of play for some people. Other people find a great deal of dignity in it. It really depends on what's going on in your head and in the head of your scene partner. It always helps if you're interested in getting into rope bondage, if you're going to explore it, experiment with it a little bit, try to work it into your fantasies in those little secret scenarios that you have in the back of your head, because without the the mindset, it's just ropes and knots and tying. And while that's all well and good for most people have to fit it into a context of some sort. Let's say you're interested in this, you want to try some of this, you're going to seek out more information, experiment with your partner. Well, there's a few things that you really need to pay attention to when it comes to safety. The first thing is if you're working with a partner, you've got to have a safe word. And a lot of people say, well, I trust my partner. I don't need a safe word. That's silly, blah, blah, blah. You do. You need some way of ensuring that your partner knows that everything must stop right now, right this moment. Don't even ask me why. It just needs to stop right now. I don't care how much you trust someone, misunderstandings can always happen. And so a safe word is a good thing to have, even if it's with somebody that you've been with all your life and you trust with your life. It's good to have that safety precaution announces to that person without any misunderstanding whatsoever, everything must stop. Why would you need to have something like that if we're just talking about rope bondage? You'd think that, well, I'm just being tied up. How dangerous can that be? Well, it can be very dangerous, very, very dangerous. One of the things that can happen, obviously, is it can constrict your blood flow. And so something that's too tight around an arm or a leg or a finger or toe or your neck could literally cut off the flow of blood to your brain. You could be dead in 5 minutes, or at least unconscious. And so it's very, very important to understand that just because you're tying somebody up, that it isn't free of risk. There's a lot of risk, and it's not just constricting blood flow to your limbs or to your brain or any other part of your body, but also constricting your ability to breathe well. And it doesn't necessarily have to involve rope around your neck to constrict your breathing. There's something called postural asphyxia, which means that you're in a position where it's very, very difficult for you to breathe. It's easy to assume that, she should be able to breathe just fine because there's no rope around her neck. Well, maybe the way she's bent over causes this postural asphyxia and makes it very difficult for this person to breathe. And so you've got to be very, very careful. You've got to monitor somebody's breathing and blood flow to all parts of their body at all times when you are involved in any kind of rope bondage. And just in case you see some problems with a constriction of blood or oxygen or anything like that, you should have a good, sturdy pair of EMT scissors around, or at least a good, sturdy pair of kitchen scissors around. You may not have those EMT scissors, but most people have a pair of kitchen scissors in their kitchen drawer someplace. And so I would very much recommend that you have those handy, because when you notice somebody turning purple or choking, unable to breathe, that's not the time to start digging through your junk drawer looking for a good pair of scissors. So have them handy and know how to use them. It also goes without saying that you should have no alcohol, no drugs involved in any way with what you're doing, either before or during any rope play, or for that matter, any kind of serious BDSM play. It's very, very easy to make a serious mistake under the influence of alcohol or drugs as a top. And it's also very easy as a bottom to ignore warning signs and pain under the influence of drugs and alcohol as a bottom. You really don't want to have any alcohol or drugs involved either before or during any kind of serious BDSM play. And that pretty much applies across the board for any kind of play. One other thing before we start getting into what you might be able to do as a rope enthusiast to meet other people in this lifestyle and to learn a little bit more about it. The one thing I'd like to add here is there are a lot of people out there who do something called self-bondage. If you're unfamiliar with bondage in general, then you probably don't know anything about self-bondage either. But self-bondage is the practice of tying yourself up. And just as I mentioned a little earlier, there's some people who just like those sensations of helplessness or immobility. They like feeling tied up and enclosed and helpless. Sometimes because they don't have a partner to help them with that kind of play, they do it to themselves. They tie themselves to the bed. They tie themselves up on the floor, helpless. They tie themselves in all sorts of strange and wonderful ways. And there's nothing wrong with this, but I just want to tell anyone who's listening tonight that if you're tempted to do this, you need to realize that this is very, very dangerous. And one of the reasons it is very dangerous is there's nobody there to help you if you make a mistake. If you tie something just a little too tight or in the wrong place, if you constrict that blood flow, if you have difficulty breathing, if you pass out because of postural asphyxia, for any one of those reasons, you are alone and there's nobody there to help you. And so you really need to be very careful with this. If you're going to do self-bondage, just be very, very cautious in how you do it. I don't know if you remember this, but several years ago, one of my heroes when I was a kid, and I'm probably telling my age here, but one of my heroes when I was a kid was David Carradine, the star of Kung Fu. Probably have seen the show or at least heard of it, and been in a lot of spaghetti westerns and that sort of thing, mostly cheesy movies. When I was a kid, he was kind of my hero, and one of the reasons I got into martial arts as a kid. Well, a couple of years ago, he died all alone in a hotel room in Thailand from self-bondage. Actually, it was from autoerotic asphyxia. He liked choking himself, but he liked choking himself by tying himself up and hanging himself in the closet. Obviously, this last time was his last time doing that, and there was no one there to help him. So it does happen. People die from self-bondage and from autoerotic asphyxia, and so be very, very careful if you're interested in those particular activities. I'm not going to say you shouldn't do them, but I will say you should definitely take some precautions before you try it. All right, we're going to take a very quick break, a little musical interlude for about 90 seconds while we get ready for our next segment. In our next segment, we're going to be talking about an international organization called Rope Bite and how you can get involved in it, start your own chapter, meet people like yourselves who are interested in rope bondage and shibari and kinbaku and all that stuff. So we'll be back in about 90 seconds with the second half of the show. I'm Mike McConnell. You're listening to Domination and Submission Radio. Domination and Submission Radio, and our topic tonight is the joy of rope. We're talking about shibari and kinbaku, otherwise known to the rest of the world as rope bondage. Now, why are people so afraid to try this, even if they think they might like it? There's a lot of reasons. One of them is that very few people have any rope around anymore. I don't know if you've noticed this, but rope is not something you see just laying around anymore. I guess in the past, rope was much more ubiquitous. I've just been wanting to use that word for a long time. Rope was everywhere in the past, but today we have other things. We have specialized clamps, and we have duct tape, and we have all sorts of other ways to attach things and tie things down and make sure that they're secure. And so there's less and less rope laying around the house, and consequently, there's less and less people just experimenting with it, I think. I think one of the other reasons a lot of people are a little afraid to experiment with rope bondage is you don't have as many people getting trained in tying knots anymore. There was a time in this country where everybody was taught how to tie knots. Almost every young man was a Boy Scout, and one of the first merit badges that you got as a Boy Scout was knot tying. Many people in the early years of this country were in the military, and a good portion of those people were in the Navy, and naval personnel always got trained on how to tie knots. A lot of people in the other services did as well. I know that I did 20 years in the Army, and I got a lot of training in tying knots, not just because I might need to tie somebody up, but you have to do things like hang communication cables between battle positions, and you have to be able to put up a tent, and you have to be able to sling a hammock to sleep in, and all sorts of other things that require a good knot. And if you can't tie a good knot, your hammock falls in the mud, and it's a really long night if you were planning on staying dry while you slept. So not being trained in how to tie a knot, I think, plays a big part in why a lot of people are a little hesitant to try rope bondage. And of course, there's always that fear of doing it wrong. People are just afraid to look silly or to fail at something. And the fact is, that's really the only way that we learn. And there's almost no way to do it wrong. Although there are ways to do it unsafely, there's almost no way to do bondage wrong as long as you're being safe, as long as both partners are enjoying it. In order to promote the lost art of intricate knot tying, we have a lot of educators out there who are advocates for rope bondage and educators. And one of those people who I plan to have as a guest on our show in August is Lokai Stein, and he is the founder of an organization called Rope Bite International. He's a professional rope rigger, a fetish photographer, he's an educator, and he's a definite advocate for spreading the word about the joys of rope bondage in shibari and kinbaku. Taken some audio that's been pre-recorded with Lokai Stein, which I'm going to share with you tonight, where we talk a little bit about how his organization, Rope Bite International, got started and how you can perhaps become a part of it. So first, he's going to tell us a little bit about how Rope Bite got started.
In late 2009, in San Francisco at Wicked Grounds, friends of mine opened up Kinky Cafe. And we were trying to figure out a way to bring more people in and also a way to integrate the professional bondage riggers and all of us who do this because we really love it and bring them all together to show that we're all the same people. So decided to start a munch. Basically good food, good talk. We happen to be very lucky at this location that you could have quasi-nudity, we can pull ropes out, and we can tie people up because this was an 18 and over establishment. So we started something called Rope Bite, B-I-T-E, and we were getting 40, 50, 60 people a month coming in to talk, to meet with the professionals that they see on the internet, and to talk with people who do this in their bedroom all the time. I had friends that I met online from overseas come in, and Dodgy Rope and his girlfriend came in from New Zealand and visited the armory and brought them out to the second Rope Bite meeting there was. And they said, wow, really love this. Can we do this back in New Zealand? I was like, sure, I would love that idea. So they created Rope Bite, B-I-G-H-T, in New Zealand. And we're B-I-T-E in the States here, and we became an international munch within 2 months' time. Now we're at about 42 locations, 42 chapters around the country, and each rope bite is slightly different, but the basic premise is open to all forms of rope bondage, not to charge money to make money, but to charge to support the location you're in. Some are food-oriented with good talk. Some are education-oriented where there are classes. But they all have the same thing. Everyone is invited. Everyone is welcome. Keep the topic to rope bondage, and it's inclusive. It is part of the community. It is not instead of another organization. Here we have a number of different things going on, rope-oriented, and we're just part of that community.
That was the start of this organization, which is now called Rope Bite International. Now, let me explain a few of the things that you might not have understood if you are completely new to the DS or BDSM lifestyles. Lokai mentioned, for example, that the organization started out as a munch. A munch is a social gathering of your fellow kinksters. It usually occurs in a restaurant, and it is often part of an organization's regular get-togethers, maybe every week, every month, maybe a couple times a month, and they usually meet in a restaurant or some other public place, sometimes in a back room where it's a little bit more private, sometimes right in the middle of the restaurant under the very noses of hundreds of vanilla people. So a munch is just a social. Imagine, though, a munch where people are sharing tips on how to tie each other up. It's kind of an interesting scenario when you really think about it. Imagine being with 20 of your closest friends in the middle of your favorite Mexican restaurant, and you're all pulling out lengths of rope and showing each other how to tie each other to the chair or something. So, yeah, you can get a little comical when you actually think about it. Oh, there's something else that I wanted to explain to you. The term rope bite. A bite is that little loop in the rope which you can then tie, pass something through. So a rope bite is a loop of rope. And he also mentioned something about the difference between those who do this in the bedroom and people who are professionals at it. And there are professional bondage educators and demonstrators and photographers and that sort of thing. So there's actually an industry built, a small cottage industry, but built around rope bondage. And there are people who do this for a living, which sounds great to me, but I just don't have the skills. So let's listen to how one of the chapters of Rope Bite International got started in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And you're about to hear Twisted View telling you about how he started his chapter in Pittsburgh.
Basically, I run mine as a open space for people to come in and talk about different forms of rope and actually practice it. We don't have food, we don't have drinks. It's not a munch per se, but more of just a hands-on space. And I leave it to everybody to figure out what they want to talk about, what they want to learn, and we can just have fun.
A little bit later on in this broadcast, we'll tell you how you could start a rope bite chapter of your own if you're interested in doing it. The next person that you're going to hear from is named Hammer, and he is the founder of Rope Bite Baltimore. And so have a listen to how that chapter got started.
We run the Baltimore Bite as a potluck dinner. We do it here at our place. It's affectionately called Chateau Broxy. We usually get about 40 people or so coming in. Usually somewhere between 5 of those people, 5 or so will be new on a monthly basis. And it's a great opportunity for people to come into this place and be social with other rope folks and have an opportunity to talk one-on-one, to learn. Sometimes there's presentations. Sometimes there's play. It's fairly limited play, not full open play like you would see in a dungeon. But that helps to keep new people from being too intimidated. Occasionally, we take the bite out to other people's homes or to restaurants. Restaurants in particular, to let somebody who's really new to the community, who may not be able to be vetted otherwise, to come in and meet with us and get to know people before we let them into our home or somebody else's home in the community. We've been doing it for about 2 years now. And as like I said, it's part of the broader community. We partner with Bondage Club Baltimore and the Dirty Things party groups, and we promote other rope groups in the area, like the Nodding Circle and Hitch and Bitches and DC Rope. We all work together to make events happen. We've brought in big stars like Midori and David Lawrence and Wicked Dave to come and perform and or talk to members of the community about things that they're passionate about. And I think it's a great forum and a well-understood type of meeting group that everybody can pick up anywhere in the world and be part of a broad community that supports rope education and getting to know each other and supporting each other.
I think Hammer makes a very good point here, which is that a lot of what motivates people to start groups like this, not necessarily because they want to show off their bondage skills, but because they want to share what they know and learn from others. They want to feel a sense of community with other people who have the same interests. There's a lot to be said for just knowing that there are other people out there like yourself. This is something that I hear over and over and over again, both in my personal life and in my social circles and in my work. I am an author. Go ahead and throw in my plug right now. I'm the author of Domination Submission, the BDSM Relationship Handbook, which is due out on Amazon.com and Barnes & Noble in just a couple of weeks. I hear it again and again and again. I didn't know that there was anyone out there like me. I thought I was a freak. You'd be so amazed at how many times I have heard that from people. And it's a good thing to know that you're not a freak, that there are people out there like you who enjoy what you enjoy. And it's very fulfilling. It's a good thing to be surrounded by people who like the same sorts of things that you like. And so sometimes you go to these munches, sometimes you become a member of these organizations, not just because you have great skills that you want to share or because that you have a hunger to learn the skills. Sometimes you go just because you want to sit down, have a cup of coffee with someone who thinks and feels the way that you do. It's something that I highly recommend that you take into account if you are considering attending a local BDSM munch group or a rope enthusiast group. Not all of the groups that develop out of an enthusiasm for rope necessarily have to become rope bite groups. There are a lot of other groups out there, and Lokai talks a little bit about some of those fringe groups and how even the rope bite groups sometimes give birth to other groups.
Fringe groups start up from just talk within the rope bites. I've heard at a lot of locations fringe things starting up because they met here and they said, let's go out and do things. And we have the two Gorilla Shibari groups here, which is, the Gorilla Suspension Group and Badass, which all came out of discussions that seeds were planted at a rope bite. And that's just local, what we have here.
There are just tons and tons of rope enthusiast groups out there. Almost every major city has a rope group somewhere hidden out in that city. Sometimes we'll have to do a lot of networking or research to find them. Obviously, they don't advertise or put up billboards, but they do exist. And so if you're interested in becoming a part of a local munch group, a rope bite, or a similar organization, or starting one of your own, and you don't have to be an expert to start a rope bite group of your own. All you have to be is interested and motivated and willing to do a little bit of organizing. And just to tell you how something like this could happen, how you can start a rope bite group of your own in your hometown or your area, Lokai gives us some tips on how to do that.
If you're in the United States, everyone here spells it B-I-T-E. Overseas tends to be B-I-G-H-T. That's just, you don't have to follow along with that, but it seems that's how a lot of new groups opening up are doing it. Rope Bite is an organization that is pretty free-form. The main thing is we want you to have a presence on the web. I have ropebite.com, which right now we are redoing so that we'll be able to put your information of when you meet, where you meet, how often, and if you want to have things thematic, what to expect when you show up. Most people, when they start a rope bite, are either starting something fresh and new, and you can form it any way you want. Other people, other groups, are already some sort of rope gathering. It's usually a rope share or some sort of class structure, and you can convert that to a rope bite. What I ask for you to do is, if you have a FetLife presence already, put the name rope bite into the title. If you don't have one, start one. put rope bite and the location into the title and send me a message, invite me to it. Some people put me as a moderator just so I can have all the groups in one section. Other people, I'm just a member of the group, and we're going to start up a newsletter where we're going to keep in touch with each other. So send me a message saying you're starting something up. Keep things non-political, please. This is not, we're starting a group because we were thrown out of another organization. We try to keep these as non-political, drama-free as possible. If there's going to be drama, it's going to be because someone's hanging upside down and she's having a phenomenal time. Again, please don't bring anything in that's going to be controversial in the sense that, oh, you're too big, too small, too green, too red to be part of our group. We highly recommend not doing that. Number one, that's not community building. That is putting up walls. We try not to have walls built. Start up a FetLife group. Contact me. Tell me that you're starting things up. Have it open to everyone. And then you get the word out. We will help you get the word out also. Again, the website is going to be restructured, ropebite.com. And this is open for anywhere. If there's a rope bite group that's in your area already, please do yours far enough away so that people won't need to decide which one to go to because they're both 5 minutes away. But it'll be far enough away so that you can bring new people in and close enough so that you can share resources. I'm going to turn things over to Twisted View and Hammer to talk about how they had theirs started. We'll go to Hammer first because I was moving from San Francisco to Baltimore, and Hammer reached out to me saying, hey, I see you moving to the area. My wife Roxy and I would love to search out a restaurant for you, a location, and we took it from there.
Yeah, we ended up hunting around the city looking for a venue. We looked at hotel opportunities with meeting rooms. We looked at restaurants. And ultimately we ended up in private homes, mostly because we could control what was available more and because it was easier to get something that was free, essentially. A large part of our community we found was not willing to pay for food or access to a venue that exceeded more than $2 or $3 per event. So homes worked out pretty well for that, and we were fortunate enough to have a large enough space and to be a trusted part of the community so people were willing to come here. Not every community has that opportunity. Not everybody's place will meet that criteria. So you could investigate other community centers. The restaurants do work well. Backrooms, the place that we first went to, actually the owner of the restaurant was showing us around, telling us which rooms he had sex with his wife in, which was kind of entertaining. And it made it very easy for us to decide this was a good place where we could have some privacy and be able to pull out rope. We felt that being able to pull out rope was a big deal to help promote what we were trying to accomplish with the bike.
Well, also one thing I loved about Baltimore when I first moved here, there were maybe 5 or 6 people that were doing any form of formal rope, I guess you can say. There were a whole bunch of people tying each other up and having a lot of fun and doing beautiful things, but no one had a rope. There wasn't a rope community. There were just a few people doing it. And the rope bite was bringing out all new rope people with a lot to share, and it just started propagating. And we needed to move from the restaurant to private home just because people wanted to learn right now how to do something. And it was much easier not knocking over a coffee cup or a bowl of soup and working around tables and then needing to leave because the restaurant was closing. That's another reason why we did shift it over to a home. And Twisted View started slightly different location-wise.
We started ours in the Gay and Lesbian Community Center. They've always been a wonderful supporter of the kink community in Pittsburgh. So they offered us the meeting room where we had a very low-cost place for people to go. Similar situation where a lot of people just didn't want to pay that much money, and I didn't want to make it prohibitive for anybody. So we started off directly as a hands-on event for people to immediately learn, tie, teach, or even just sit back and watch and learn just by watching or get a feel of it.
Okay. So if you want to start up your own rope bike, please contact me. I'll tell you if there's someone else in the area that already has something in motion, or if you have something going already, just contact me. I went through the steps. It is really that simple. Call yourself Rope Bite, invite everyone, promote yourself through FetLife and through other venues, and we will get you onto the official Rope Bite website, because Twisted View was actually telling us someone who just showed up to their Rope Bite didn't find it through FetLife. They found it through the website, and showed up an hour early because that's what we had on the website. That is now changed.
So that is how you start your own rope bite chapter if you're interested. Essentially, it's very simple. You call yourself a rope bite, you invite people, you plan activities, and you contact Lokai, and I'll give you information on how to do that in just a few moments. I do have a question that appeared in our chat room, and so I'm going to answer that question now since we do have a few more minutes till the end of this show. The question is, are there different types of rope used in rope play, and is a certain type better for certain types of bondage? And the answer is yes. There really is an infinite number of different types of rope that you can use for this sort of thing, but generally speaking, the rope that is used for shibari and kinbaku falls into, first of all, 3 general lengths of rope. You usually have a 10-foot length of rope, maybe a 30-foot length of rope, and then 50 to 60 feet. Anything longer than that makes it almost impossible to actually tie any knots without having to go through a really laborious process of pulling the loose end through your bites over and over again. So it can become very, very tedious. So generally speaking, in terms of length, 10 feet, 30 feet, and 50 to 60 feet. In terms of the types of rope that you use, generally fall into the categories of hemp or jute, which is a natural rope that is usually the preferred choice of most the folks out there who really know what they're doing, and I'm really not one of those people. Of the folks that I know that really know what they're doing when it comes to shibari and kinbaku, they generally prefer hemp or jute rope, but there are also a lot of people out there who really like nylon braided rope, and sometimes just cotton rope works really well. The nylon braids tend to be preferred by a lot of folks in thicker varieties for harnesses and wraps around the body, and they tend to use the thinner varieties of rope for the decorative stuff. And you got to remember that it all depends not just on how it looks, but a lot of it depends on the functionality of the rope. If the rope is going to be supporting some body weight, then you need something that is sturdy and won't bind or clump up or break down under stress. If you want something that's going to look good for the camera, then you choose type of rope that is more suited to that. So depending on what kind of function you want your rope to be able to perform, you generally choose your rope according to its characteristics. Now, ropes also sometimes come with a solid core in them, and sometimes that core can be pulled out and it can be used as a hollow core rope. And so it really kind of depends on what you're going to use it for and what your standards are and what your preferences are. Sometimes it's just a matter of personal preference. Some people just like the way certain types of ropes look or feel. And that same goes for the person who's being tied up. Sometimes certain kinds of rope just feel better against the skin or are more central to them or whatever the reasons they have for having a preference there. So I hope that answered your question. And I see another question there about nylon. Yeah, nylon, we think nylon, when we think of nylon generally outside of rope, we think of it as just one thing. But nylon can be processed into all sorts of very interesting textures and different products with different tensile strengths and that sort of thing. And so just because I'm talking about a nylon rope, I don't want you to think of the nylon rope that you use to pull your canoe up the stream, okay? There are other types of nylon that are manufactured to different standards and have different textures and different strengths. And so just think of the fact that some of the clothing that you wear is nylon and very soft against the skin, and then other pieces of nylon clothing that you wear are sometimes very rough against the skin or very uncomfortable to wear. So it really just kind of depends on how it's produced and what you're looking for. So I hope that answers your question. So if you're interested in starting or even attending a rope bite group or a similar group, then I highly recommend that you get in touch with Lokai Stein. Let him tell you how to do that.
Lokai@lokai.com. You can contact me through FetLife on Lokai. It could be Lokai@ropebite.com as well.
There you go. You can also find out a little bit more about the organization and Lokai at his website, which is ropebite.com. So check that out. And as I said, if you're interested in rope bondage at all, I highly recommend that are consenting and enjoying what's going on, go to town. Have fun with it. I personally enjoy rope bondage. There's a lot to like about it. I love the power exchange. I love the artistic and aesthetic qualities that go along with it. I love the fact that it is a lot of fun that you can have with a relatively simple piece of equipment. And if you're interested in exploring bondage, it doesn't necessarily have to be rope bondage. We'll get into those topics in future shows. There's all sorts of things that you can do when it comes to bondage, and this rope bondage is just one small slice of that bondage culture that is so interesting. It's so much an interesting part of the BDSM culture. So I hope you've learned something tonight. I know that I always do when I do these shows. My name is Mike McKay. You've been listening to The Joy of Rope on Domination and Submission Radio. Tune in next week, and we'll have a great show for you then as well. Thanks very much for listening, and take care.